All right, say something again.
Is this any better?
Yes, much better.
Okay. So I put in my headphones and then switch to this microphone.
Okay, hold on 1 minute.
No,
Unmute. Do you
there
hear
you
me
go. Now
now?
I can hear you.
All right, let me get this set in audio, built-in speaker. All right, I don't hear you now.
Okay, can you hear me now?
I cannot hear you.
Okay.
Let me let me
Yeah.
see.
Let me see.
Eh. We got the camera, we got the audio, MacBook Pro microphone, 1 2 1 2 1 2. All right,
Hello.
here the speakers. Can you take your headphones out?
Yep.
Your mic isn't connected, it's saying. Um
I know what it is now. On that.
okay.
Now that I took the things
Go
out.
out and come back. Can you go
Okay.
out and come back? All right.
Yep. All right. How does that sound?
Oh, that sounds much better. Do you
All
hear me?
right. I can. Let me grab water.
Okay.
There you go. Yes, I can hear you well.
Okay, now Kris Hennings, right?
That's
That's how you say your
no
name?
S, no S at the end, but Kris
Henning.
Henning. Yep.
Henning. Okay. All right, we're gonna start in, let's say, right about now. Okay, let me get this back some. Peace and Black Power family. This is your host Rahiem Shabazz, and we are here for another episode of Necessary Blackness podcast. And today, family, we have a special guest in the building, and she has worked 25 years representing Black youth in the Washington, D.C. area in the juvenile court. She has been pivotal in many cases in helping those who don't have a voice have a voice. So she advocates for the most vulnerable of society, those who are voiceless, and she's also a law professor. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Kris Henning. How you doing, my sister?
I am great. So happy to be here with you, Rahiem.
I know this interview has been a long time in the making. I want to let everybody know that she is an author of a book that has been receiving rave reviews from the New York Post and several other mainstream and prestigious press. I had the opportunity to read most of it. I didn't finish it yet because I'm quite busy, but it definitely was a fascinating book. And I want you to tell our audience a little bit about the book and tell us what was the inception for you to come out with this book.
Yeah. So thank you for elevating this conversation. So the book is called The Rage of Innocence: How America Criminalizes Black Youth.
Mm-hmm.
And it really is a collection of stories about many of the young people that I have represented over the last 25, 26 years, as well as a number of other high profile stories that many of you have already heard about, like Tamir Rice, Mike Brown, um, and the like, but I tell different parts of those stories to really highlight the ways in which Black children are not allowed to be children at all. The ways in which we know that adolescents, that teenagers all across the world, not just in the United States, but all across the world, are impulsive, they're reactive, they're creative, they're boundary testers, right?
That's right.
Risk takers, right? And in fact, that's what makes us successful. The willingness and the ability to try things new, the courage, the creativity to try things new is what makes us succeed as adults. But it also means that sometimes our behaviors meet the elements of a criminal offense. Now, the
Mm.
book is all about how when you're a Black child, you are criminalized for those normal adolescent risk taking and impulsive behaviors. But if you're a white child, you are allowed to experiment in every way possible. You're allowed what we call the privilege of being a kid. And so I wrote this book because, as you said, I've been representing kids in the nation's capital for 25 years.
Mhm.
And in that entire time, I have only represented 4 white children.
Oh,
That's it.
wow.
Everybody should be shocked by that number, Rahiem. 4 white kids. That's it. Every other child that I've represented has been an African American child. And so, folks who are not from DC might be thinking, well, wait a minute, are there no white kids in DC? Of course there are. They might be thinking, well, do white kids engage in criminal behavior? Of course they are. We just talked about all of the impulsivity and risk taking. They experiment with drugs and alcohol and sex, and they get into fights, and they do all the silly and foolish things that kids do, and we never see them in court. Okay, and
Yeah, I wanted to just chime in, right? Because in your book, and this goes inside with what you were saying, America has this irrational and manufactured fear for Black youth, particularly. And we see that time and time again. There's always a different standard. We've seen that in the recent basketball game with the female LSU. What
right,
happened? They both did the same hand gesture, and one was considered offensive. She was called all type of names, while the white player was considered hip and with swag.
right.
We see this time and time with our young Black males. Was there ever a time that this fear didn't exist, or this is something that has been an innate nature of other individuals?
Yes, it is something. The answer is there was no. There was never a time when this did not exist. Right,
Mhm.
that our very country was founded on this really the idea that Black children were less than, and in fact less than human. Okay,
Mhm.
right. The very founding of our country was rooted in the enslavement of Black people, including Black children, who were treated like property. The only way to justify that dehumanization is to come up with a narrative that paints Black children as, and all Black people as lazy, dangerous, threatening imbeciles, right? That who cannot survive unless the master is guiding and directing them. Fast forward, right, to the civil rights era, and shoot, you don't have to go that far. Fast forward to the lynching era, right, where
Mhm.
children like Emmett Till, 14 years old,
Absolutely.
is lynched, if you will, killed, because he allegedly whistled at a white woman, which has now been recanted. Again, you can only justify the absolute degradation and dehumanization of Black children by creating a false narrative that they are a threat to white women. Right. And then fast forward to the 1990s, and you see the language about the super predator, coming, to rape, maim, and kill all of America by the year 2000. We know good and well that did not happen. But all of these very intentional narratives have been put forth to justify the differential and inhumane treatment of Black children. And it was only after these explicit narratives, right? These very clear, um, you know, articulated narratives are no longer politically correct. You can't go around saying, even though you still hear it, but that Black children are brutes and thugs. Instead, now it's implicit, right? So it's that implicit narrative where you see a Tamir Rice in a park with a play gun. You assume automatically he must be dangerous. You see kids laughing in a group. You assume Black kids laughing. You assume they must be dangerous. That's how implicit bias works after the explicit narratives have gone away.
Now we talk about implicit bias. This has been going on a long time. America has a history of wrongfully convicting Black youth, whether we look at the Scottsboro case, you mentioned Emmett Till, and we also had the Central Park Five, who have been exonerated for crimes that they have been accused of, right? So I wanted to ask you, what steps can we take as Black America, right, to circumvent situations like this from happening?
Well, first and foremost, we got to check ourselves, because this discussion about implicit racial bias happens inside our community as well, right? And so that we hear narratives on the, like right now, people are talking about, hey, crime is on the rise again. People are worried about gun violence, and people readily, Black people even, readily buy into the media narrative that Black children, again, are running amok. That's the narrative again, just like the 80s and 90s are running amok, when in reality, the data shows we got to pay attention to the data, right? And that the data shows that still crime is, significantly lower, than it was back in the 80s and the 90s. And more important, that very few children of any race and any crime are involved in the types of criminal behavior that we are most afraid of: rape, murder, homicides, And so those are the things that make the news. Those are the things that understandably have us all afraid, but we have to be careful not to blame or punish or isolate the entire Black adolescent population. And for the sins of the one or two, right? So that's number one, right? Number two is like when you hear these narratives, you hear a news story about even a serious violent offense, carjacking or a shooting, you have to force yourself to stop, think, and recognize that there's always multiple sides to a story, and that you got to get the rest of the information or not, right? But like accept that you don't know it all, right? And then the third thing I think we as a Black community need to do internally before we talk about externally, but the third thing we need to do internally is recognize that Black children are not beyond redemption. Even when they engage in the most serious offenses, that they are not beyond redemption. We have to ask the hard questions. What are the root causes of the behavior? And what can we as a society do to help those kids? And so that's part of that transitions into what can we as a Black community do about the disparate treatment of Black kids and the false convictions. Is that one, we need to be out front speaking, testifying before our that's right, our local lawmakers about we don't need to transfer children to adult court. Do not buy in to the hype that somehow putting a 15-year-old under the jail because they engaged in some impulsive behavior, some peer-driven behavior that even led to the most horrendous outcome. Even that child is not beyond redemption with the right services and the right intervention. So we as a community need to be advocating for the right things, right? We need to be advocating for services for young people. We need to be advocating, Rahiem, for a public health approach to school safety and to public safety. And that's all about having a continuum of mental health providers in our school systems, in our communities. It means vocational support. It means restorative justice. It means smaller class sizes. It means social emotional learning and conflict resolution. And even in schools where there is serious of violence in that school, we need violence interrupters and credible messengers who look like the children who are most impacted to go into those schools and help mediate and bridge relationships that have been broken. That's what we need to be advocating for.
We need all of the above. Everything that you just said, we need that, and we need that expeditiously. Right. I just want to acknowledge someone, Nikki the God. She left a comment and she says peace, and she's an individual that been rocking with us from day one. And speaking of her, she posted a tweet the other day, right? Because there's a new movie. I'm not sure if you in tune with pop culture, but about Freaknik. You know
I do know what Freaknik is, but I didn't know there was a movie about Freaknik.
Oh yeah, and it's coming out on Hulu, right?
Okay.
And a lot of people are saying that what they're going to do is they're going to use this movie to criminalize Black men and show that these are the brute, overly sexualized men, and it's going to be, and you know how they had Surviving R. Kelly, they're going to be having Surviving Freaknik, when this was a period in time where these was young children, and a lot of them was under the age of 25, and we know that the front lobe of your brain is not fully developed until you're in your mid-20s, and they make, like you was talking earlier, impulsive decisions.
Right.
And we don't see this type of criminalization or media hype when white people do it, right? So what do you have to say about the media criminalization of Black youth?
Yeah, when I have conversations with folks in the media, I do, had opportunity to do some trainings. It's some of the same stuff about checking yourself and like making sure that the media is doing a fair and accurate job of nuanced data collection, of understanding. First of all, I tell every crime beat reporter, you've got to get training in adolescent development, right? So all the things you just said about the adolescent brain and the not being fully developed, all of that's got to be part of the training, right? They also have to understand the realities that very few children are committing the types of crimes that we're talking about. They haven't all run amok. We also have to be careful about, this is what I talk to people about, understanding how differently Kyle Rittenhouse that story was told than the stories of very similar Black children, right? I mean, y'all think about Kyle Rittenhouse. His behavior was the epitome of everything we just talked about adolescent development. He's the 17-year-old kid who crosses state lines, right? Walking through the street with an assault rifle, strapped across his body in plain view. In his 17-year-old brain, he's convinced, right, that he can somehow has the capacity and the skills to protect businesses that somehow need to be protected in this Black Lives Matter protest. He is impulsive, reactive. He's doing what his peers are doing because why? His friends called him over, gave him the gun, right? He's not thinking ahead to the long-term consequences. He's not weighing or assessing the risk. None of that, right? He's being a teenager, right?
You know why, right? Because he got complexion for protection.
Exactly. Go ahead now. Exactly. But, and this is exactly what happens, right? He's out there and, all of a sudden things get out of control. Things go awry. He ends up taking the lives of two people and severely injuring another. Then his mother, and his defense attorney, rightfully so, wanted the whole world to see him as an adolescent who got in over his head, period, right? Now, retell that story in blackface, and that's a whole different outcome. Whole different story. Absolutely.
One of the things that they're going to do is they're going to treat you like a child, but they're going to punish you like an adult.
Absolutely. Not give you due process, not give you an opportunity to be heard, all that. And I tell people, like, look, even think about like Kyle Rittenhouse's story in blackface means imagine that a Black kid, calls his friend and says, hey man, I'm out here at a park and I'm afraid something might go down. Can you please just come so I have some numbers, right? So I have some backup.
Mhm.
The friend comes out, somebody passes him a gun just for safekeeping, right? And again, things go awry. Somebody, they end up taking a life, right? Nobody accepts that this could have been an adolescent impulsive reaction, a fear reaction. Nobody gives them the benefit of the adolescent development research. None of that. In fact, quite to the contrary, they're quick to label that kid, the two kids who are out at the park, as gang members. And if you all look, if you Google and look at some of the pictures of Kyle Rittenhouse walking down the street, you see his friend. They're dressed just alike. You know what I mean? Look, in fatigues. They look just like gang members. Nobody ever talked about them as being a gang. None of that. And so our whole analysis is just different, right? And that speaks to everybody. Media needs to pay attention. All of us need to pay attention. How quickly we buy into the labeling and the harms and the consequences that come with labeling, right? White kids dress alike, hang out with friends, and they never get called gang members, so.
There's a video. I don't know if you follow me on Instagram, but I posted a video yesterday of this white teacher, and she was really I don't know what triggered her, right? But her manner and behavior was very unprofessional. She asked the students, what did he do that's different, and why is he doing that? And one of the kids told her, you're doing that because he's black, right? And you're racist. That's what the student said, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, at most, he was mouthing off, and kids are known to tell the truth for what they see. And this is how this young man felt. And her reaction to him when she got in his face and was yelling and screaming at him, belittling him and bullying him and towering over him.
Right.
Many people called for her firing and said this was, apparently wrong. Me, I always tell people that we're the only race of people that send our children to their open enemy, and people who don't have their best interests at heart, and people who, primarily doesn't look like them. And I was surprised, right? Because I will hope to believe that most people follow me because they know the type of person I am, and my core belief and me advocating for kids. But I was surprised more than anything of some of the response I was getting. And then from people that I know, some of them in the entertainment industry, some of them I know personally. And, the comments started with this generation of kids, they need to learn to respect adults. And these kids are out of control. And, she was right. And I was like, wow.
Right.
Imagine when you was a kid.
That's right.
And advocated for you in that manner. And it was just, some people was like, well, there's probably more to this story. But the videos that we're seeing, you can say to yourself that regardless to what happened before record was pressed, this is an adult who's in a professional position. And if you don't know how to deal with children, this is not the occupation for you. And I know you as a child advocate, right? You see that time and time again, especially in the school system and with the teachers that are backed by a powerful union. And then you have the police in school, right? And this is where the school to prison pipeline starts. What are your thoughts on policing in the school, primarily in the Black American community?
Yeah, so there are a lot of things to say. And let me just say, with regard to, I haven't seen the video, and I will definitely check that out. But that I, one, as much sympathy as I have, and I do have sympathy for teachers who are not well resourced, have classrooms that are too big, don't have behavioral tech, and mental health supports inside the classroom. So I know how hard it is. That said, it's really so critical to do that whoa, stop, think, and think about how you are modeling for not only that student, but for every other student. How do you resolve conflicts? How do you address, misbehavior and discord? They're watching you. They're watching you. And that, as you indicated, that she's an adult with an adult brain and hopefully an adult capacity to regulate her emotions. And I'm saying that in a very technical and clinical way because adolescents are just the opposite. They don't have that, very often, notwithstanding, yes, as all your commenters said, kids, technically know the difference between right and wrong. However, kids, especially kids with disabilities, kids who are experiencing trauma, kids who feel singled out and treated unfairly, really have diminished capacity to regulate those emotions, to articulate, wisely, calmly, clearly how they're feeling. And so many of these kids respond in outbursts. If I understood you correctly, it was something saying that the kid was telling her that she was being racist, or no?
Yeah, he was saying, basically he was just telling her, you did what you did because that was a black student, and ma'am, you're racist. And
So yeah,
just went crazy, and you know how they say a hit dog will holler. So
yeah, exactly.
that's what happened. I need to look at my time. Okay, we got good time, and I know at 6 o'clock you
Yeah,
have to boogie, you have to skate, right?
exactly,
All right,
exactly.
we
But
got a few more minutes.
yeah,
Your book, there was a chapter that was very compelling, and that stood out to me. It was called "The Dehumanization of Black Youth When Children Aren't Children Anymore." And earlier, I spoke about how they would treat you like a child, and punish you as an adult. Right? Tell me a little bit about that chapter.
yeah. That chapter is all about how kids on the deep inside, right? The kids who do commit serious crimes are not given the benefit of the doubt. That there is a growing body of evidence, best practices is what we call them, for engaging with young people, even young people who have engaged in serious and repeat offenses, that there's a way to handle them with humanity. There's a way to do comprehensive wraparound interventions, what they call multi-systemic therapy, family functional therapy. That means there is concerted interventions in every sort of system that the kid interacts with: the school system, the home, the community, mental health, all of that. Somebody's intervening on behalf in favor of that kid to
Yeah.
make those systems work better individually and together. But we don't do that for Black kids. So I talk about how Black kids are far more likely to be prosecuted as if they were an adult, like even a 15-year-old. So think about Khalif Browder out of New York, 16-year-old child, prosecuted as an adult for a crime, one, he didn't even commit, and for which actually never came to trial because he was held in Rikers Island for 3 years, and ultimately, finally, and 3 years when the prosecutors knew that they had no government witness, no complaining witness, right? And so things like that. That's what that chapter is about. It's a chapter about solitary confinement. It's a chapter about how we put Black kids, like for those folks who watch Ava DuVernay's When They See Us, right, and how Corey, Wise in that one of the exonerated 5 was held in solitary confinement for extended, periods of his time. Khalif Browder, solitary confinement for extended periods of that 3 years. In fact, the majority of the 3 years, he was, beaten and put in solitary confinement. So that's what that chapter is all about, right? The dehumanization. Even I don't care. Nobody is as bad as the worst thing they've ever done, right? Nobody, right? You can't, right? Like take a 15-year-old who is every bit of a child, put him in the adult system, put him in adult jail, and think that all of a sudden, he's going to be an adult. You're putting him to be prey to other inmates. You're putting him to be prey to sexual violence, physical violence by guards and by other, people who are incarcerated. There are so many, working with young people who are 14 years old who tried as adults, some of which later exonerated. How tragic is that? You stole somebody's childhood, right? So I think that's a huge issue. Yeah.
Now, you talk about the dehumanization of Black youth, right? And you talked about how we as a community have to stand behind them, the teachers at school, the community, the parents, right? in society, we have people from all walks of life. We have kids that are raising kids, typically their other siblings, and they don't have the two-parent household. They don't have the mother that's active in their life, right? But they do have a Christine, someone like you, who's going to advocate on their behalf. I want you to speak to parents that may have a troubled youth, that how important it is to have an advocate as yourself who can speak for them, because a lot of people are not eloquent as you, and that can go in there and that speak as an educated lawyer and advocate for these children. To the parents that may have a child that's going through something, how important it is for them to reach out to somebody like you to advocate on their behalf and get the help that they need.
It's very important. And there are states across the country, or I should say courthouses across the country, where there are officials who try to encourage parents to waive their right to counsel. And it's actually not even their right, it's the child's right, right? But to urge their kids to waive their right to counsel, either because they're afraid of the fees or the cost. So the thing is, there are access to free lawyers and free lawyers who care. Okay. And I know there's a myth, and it is true sometimes, that when you get a lawyer who's court appointed or unpaid, they don't have the time or the resources. And to be quite frank, sometimes the commitment to represent you well. However, there are places where you can call, where we can help you find a lawyer where you live who really cares. And so I, at the National Juvenile Defender Center, which is now called the GALT Center, GAULT, the GALT Center, can help you find a lawyer for your child. If worst case scenario, look me up at the Georgetown. I'm easy to find. Georgetown Juvenile Justice Clinic. Google me. You can email me. I can put you in touch. If I don't know someone in your city, I can, help find you. It is important to get a lawyer, and to get a lawyer who cares, because our kids so often don't get the same kind of due process, right? The fair trial. They get railroaded into taking pleas. They get railroaded into confessing, if you will, to the police without giving any context or any mitigation, right? That helps explain how it happened or why it happened. So you really have to have a lawyer and an advocate. And also that we as advocates fight for alternatives to traditional prosecution. Everything, and actually most things, don't belong in court, especially involving teenagers, right? We don't need courts, right? To teach a kid to stop talking back, to adults, right? Like that situation at the school that you talked about, right? So it's really, really important. Also, if you want to talk about school police, you asked me a little bit about school police. It's like part of the problem with school police is that we then rely on policing for absolutely everything. So a kid who's having a traumatic episode at school, a kid who's having a mental health crisis at school, a kid who is disabled, has a speech and language disorder, autism, all of those things, kids who get sent to the nurse's office because they've got a stomach ache, all of that becomes criminalized, right? As all of a sudden, instead of like calling mental health professionals for those interventions, we call the police, right? So police in schools means more arrest of police in schools. And let me just tell you, back on school data, Black girls are 3.6 times more likely to be arrested at school than a white girl. Black boys are 2.4 times more likely to be arrested at school than a white boy. And very often for behaviors that I guarantee you are never ever referred to the police at a white school.
And you know what it is? It's like with the black females, black female children. It's willful defiance.
That's right.
When they ask you to do something, you don't do it fast enough, or how some of our sisters, they can be sassy with the mouth, and children is going to be children, and that's not a criminal offense.
That's right.
And we see that happening time and time again. And that's where the prison pipeline come involved, when you have law enforcement involved in these particular areas. And we know, the mass school shooting, It's not happening in predominantly Black schools. And the profile, this is not Rahiem speaking, this is the FBI, the CIA, and every news outlet. The suspect doesn't fit the profile of a young Black male in the urban community. We know that for
right.
fact.
Fact.
Stand on that. All right, so I want you to do something for me, right? 25 years advocating for kids, and I know it all have came across your desk. The most egregious cases that should have never been
Yes.
brought before the courts, case that went all the way to litigation.
Yes.
And you advocated, and a child probably was allowed to go home to their family. It's just so many cases that we hear about, and I know you're familiar with the what it was, cash for students, the judge in Pennsylvania.
Kids for Cash. Yes.
Kids for cash,
right.
like that. And I don't even think he went to jail. I think he got fined or something. Like,
right, they got a lot of fine. I do think they finally went to jail though. This is very recent. So this the Kids for Cash is an old story. Like I want to say 2015, but they've been fortunately there's been so much outrage. I know they got a huge fine, and then I think they might have gone in very, very recently. Like
I think so. I remember the fine, and then I remember like most recently, like within the last 2 years, it resurfaced again in the news.
Again.
And I think they did find them. But what I want you to do, with all the years of your experience, could you just, I know due to privacy laws, you can't say names and nothing like that, so we're not asking you that. But if you could give us a case scenario where you advocated for a child and probably against all odds, you were successful in your endeavors, and the child came out right on the other side, and he was able to probably join his family or something like that.
Yes, I'm happy to tell. I actually have two, but I'll at least tell one of them. And I'm going to ask you all.
We got time.
Right. Look, so I'm going to ask you all, listen to like read the book, The Rage of Innocence, How America Criminalizes Black Youth. And I'm going to tell you, the first thing I'm going to tell you is the opening story of the book, because that is one of the main things that made me write this book. And it was a story about a client that I represent. I call him Eric in the book. At the time, Eric, you remember this? So Eric, a 13-year-old boy who one Saturday night was watching a movie. Someone in the movie had a Molotov cocktail. In his 13-year-old brain, he thinks, ooh, this is cool. Let me see if I can make something that looks like this. He does not research it, doesn't ask anybody what's in a Molotov cocktail. He's just being a kid. He goes into his kitchen, he grabs a glass bottle, and he begins to pour in whatever liquid he can find, bleach, pine slaw, whatever, water. He then tapes up the bottle so that it looks like a Molotov cocktail. But here's my favorite part of the story. He also takes a piece of toilet paper, right? And runs the toilet paper from the inside of the bottle to the outside, closes the cap. Now, all of us listening know that toilet paper is going to burn out before it even gets to the, to the cap, right? But he's just playing with a toy. It's Saturday night. He plays with it. He gets tired of it. He puts the bottle in his book bag and forgets all about it. Monday morning comes, and the only reason he put it in his book bag is because his mother had white carpet. Monday morning comes, his mother drives him to school. Eric gets out, he walks into school, puts his book bag through the metal detector. A school resource officer sees the bottle and says, "What is that?" Eric immediately says, "Oh, that is nothing. You could throw it away." Wasn't even trying to keep it. Wasn't even trying to think about it, right? Eric goes on to class, and little does he know, this is the beginning of a 9-month ordeal in our local juvenile court. This child, the school calls the police department, the fire department. They drag this kid out of his class, arrest him in front of classmates and teachers. He's held in detention overnight and brought to court the next day and charged with both possession of a Molotov cocktail and arson. I've already told you the liquids inside are bleach and pine sol. They're not catching on fire. And he told them, I am not trying to blow up the school. When he got arrested, he was like, it was just a toy. Nobody believed him. Nobody gave him the benefit of the doubt. So he ends up in court for 9 months before we are able to get him out. Here's the deal, though, and this is what everybody needs to hear. I was giving a talk. I was in a conference in New Haven in Connecticut sometime after that. I tell this story, this very story about Eric. At that conference, a woman comes up to me and she says, it was a white woman. She says, my son did the exact same thing. And I say to her, what happened? You know what she tells me? That kid got placed in advanced science classes. So he gets rewarded for bringing this Molotov cocktail looking thing to school. Whereas my client gets arrested. Not only he gets arrested, prosecuted, expelled from school, all the things, right? We had to fight, right? We were the lawyers in his delinquency case. We fought. We called in expert witnesses to show that it would never be flammable. We had pretrial hearings. We filed motions to dismiss the case. We also got another lawyer to advocate for him against the school suspension, school expulsion. They got him back in school. But even when they got him back in school, they kicked him out of all of his extracurricular activities. Drama class. He was huge into arts and advocacy. It just was tragic. But he, after 9 months, we did convince the court to throw the case out in what they call in the interest of justice, because we kept making this fairness and equity arguments, that even if it had been flammable, which it wasn't, right, that it just made no sense. That he was not trying to blow up the school. So we finally got the case dismissed. I've been in touch with him since. You can read the end of the book and find out what happens to him, but he's doing well. Doing very well.
Yeah, so. that was, when I read that, I was like, wow. And there's instances where individuals commit remotely the same exact crime, go in front of the same judge, right? And the person that might be white might have a longer and extensive criminal background, and they get to go home, and the other person gets sentenced to a determined amount of time in jail. And you can't help but say, this is racist. And this is racism at its finest.
That's right.
So listen, I know I don't have too much time left with you. I definitely appreciate you for coming here, and let's not let this be your first and your last time. Before you give out your social media handle and allow people to be able to connect with you on social media, is there anything that I didn't ask you that I should have asked you, or is there anything that you want to say in your last closing words?
Yeah, I want to make sure people really understand the trauma associated with this over policing and hyper surveillance of Black people, of Black children in particular, that there is now research, right? Like, the empirical researchers have looked at the psychological trauma that comes from the over policing of young people. So kids who live in heavily surveilled neighborhoods, heavily policed neighborhoods, heavily policed schools, and who are constantly or even frequently under, stop and frisk by the police, report high rates of fear, anxiety, depression, hopelessness. They become always on guard, right? Always hyper vigilant, right? Always on guard, distrusting police officers. And a lot of that distrust, you think about that little boy that you talked about, that distrust of police carries over to other adult figures in their life, like teachers, right? Like counselors. You begin to lose faith when you, as a Black child, are constantly under target, constantly being labeled as criminal, isolated and excluded and arrested. That's really a traumatic experience. And, the trauma occurs not just from being the direct target, but also from witnessing it, right, in your community, hearing about it from friends and family, or even watching the death of George Floyd, Tamir Rice and Mike Brown on television. All of that is having a horrendous impact on our Black children, right? And so when we think about the cost associated with police in schools or over policing, police being parked in, in all of the parks in Black neighborhoods, so that the Black kids don't feel like there's a safe place to go and to be kids, right? All of that has a real psychological cost on our kids, and it actually does nothing to improve, public safety. So that's one of the things I really like to leave with folks is this idea we've got to learn how to let kids be kids, right? Creating safe space. I'm not saying don't redirect them. I'm not saying give them guidance, but we don't need police officers to do that. We need to demand, resources, or, a reallocation of resources, right? So we have more opportunities for play, recreation, leisure, study, jobs, fun for kids, mentors, all those things that make kids grow up well, right? Instead of over policing. We are really hurting our kids and ourselves with what we keep doing and that we know is wrong.
I'm so glad you said what you said and you put it in the manner that you did, because a lot of people will believe, oh, it's just not policing. It's just the type of police. We don't need white police in our community. If we have more Black police. No, we don't need police, period. Whether they're Black or they're white, because we seen what happened in Tennessee.
That's
with
right.
What is it, Tyreek Nichols?
Oh yeah, with Tyree Nichols. There's another story out of Tennessee too, Rutherford County in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, where a judge was sending 8-year-old kids, to jail for behavior that didn't even constitute a crime on the books. Y'all, there are stories after stories after stories. I'm telling you.
And what's happening with this judge?
Well, so that judge got, sort of ProPublica, one of the media outlets, really blew that story up. And then, she's gotten, reprimanded, very similar to the Kids for Cash, scenario.
Reprimanded and probably was able to retire with a full pension.
Probably, right? Exactly. Sending 8-year-old children, right? Having them arrested, calling the police, having them arrested for behaviors that did not even constitute a crime on the books. Wow. Just crazy stuff.
Well, I'll tell you one thing, family. It is a blessing to have a sister such as herself that is advocating for our kids, and we definitely need more advocates for our kids. I appreciate you coming here. And in closing, can you give individuals your social media and how they can get in contact with you?
Absolutely. So you can usually find me at Prof Henning. No, sorry. At Prof Kris Henning on most social media accounts. So at Prof Kris Henning.
Now, when you say Prof, that's PROF, right?
That's right. That's right. PROF KRIS Henning, HENNING, all run together at Prof Kris Henning. So you can find me there. You can also, I'm really easy to find if you just do a search for me, Kristen Henning, Georgetown Juvenile Justice Clinic. I pop up all over the place. You can hit me up through my email. You can also, I have a website just for my book, which has all my public speaking contact information, rageofinnocence.com. All right. rageofinnocence.com.
And you also, I was looking at your calendar. You are very, very busy.
Yes.
I'm getting ready to release a book. I'm like, I hope my calendar look like this. So
can
you tell us some of the places that you're going to be visiting in the next coming week? Because I see like the whole April is like almost.
Yeah, I try to figure out what's public.
I think some of them is at Harvard or University.
Yeah, I just got back from Harvard, so a lot of them are public. I just did public libraries. The best way to find me is like rageofinnocence.com or really if you Google, I pop up where I'm coming, where I'm going to be. It's hard for me to even just figure out. You know what? For those in LA, I mean, I know you're in Atlanta, I'm in DC, but I'm going out to LA this next weekend, next Saturday, for a book event all day. So it's called the LA Times Book Festival. I will be out there. That's public. And I'll be out, on a booth and have a little speaking engagement out there. So LA is a good place. You might find me next.
Did you make it to the New York Times bestseller list?
I did not, but guess what though? I did make it to the front page of the New York Times book review.
Okay, that's what I think. And they got the LA Times book.
Yes, there's an LA Times article, Washington Post article. So there's out there. Yeah.
Yeah, doing your thing. I see you doing your thing, and
I appreciate it.
it just warms my heart, right? Because this is about children.
That's right.
You know what I
Black
mean?
children at that.
And Black children. You know what I mean? And you know me, I'm unapologetically Black.
That's right.
So
That's
I
right.
love it, man, because we don't have too many individuals such as yourself, and I know you probably mentoring other people. You know, we got to start passing the baton to other individuals.
That's right. That's right.
Do this advocacy work because it's enough for everybody to go around. The way they doing us out here, we got to have these advocates. So once again, Christine, I thank you. And like I said, you know, this is your first time. Let's don't make it your last time. I welcome you back. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Rahiem Shabazz. And if you're just joining us, you better press rewind and tune into this one right here. This is one for the history books. Peace and Black power.
All right. Peace and blessings too. Y'all take care.
Oh man, is it cutting off? I don't know why my computer. Oh, there you go.